In the dense pre-dawn fog of a congested port, the rhythmic pulse of a container ship's engine is replaced by the screech of tearing steel. The vessel goes dead in the water as seawater surges into a forward void space, clearly audible from the forecastle. On the bridge, the master strikes the general alarm. He initiates a high-stakes notification sequence, radioing the port authority to close the channel, waking a duty superintendent on the other side of the world, and calling the P&I Club to trigger third-party liability coverage. This chart and logo represent the official investigators, like the NTSB, who step in to identify engineering and human factor root causes. They operate under a no-blame statutory framework. Their sole legal objective is safety learning, not the apportionment of civil or criminal liability. Every action taken now is a race against an exponentially rising meter. With the vessel disabled, the cost clock runs at roughly $75,000 a day in lost hire alone, a figure that climbs rapidly as environmental exposure and cargo claims accrue. Within 90 minutes, a specialized ecosystem of technical experts converges on the flooded forecastle. 4 distinct authorities arrive simultaneously: the Hull and Machinery surveyor, the P&I representative, the classification surveyor, and the flag state inspector. Their financial interests diverge immediately. The H&M surveyor focuses on the physical damage to the insured asset, while the P&I surveyor calculates the vessel's exposure to third-party liabilities, from oil pollution to damaged port infrastructure. Beside them stands the classification surveyor. His authority is absolute on the question of structural safety. He alone decides whether the ship remains in class and whether she can move again under her own power. If the ship cannot be stabilized, commercial salvers are activated under the Lloyd's open form. This contract carries a ruthless operating principle: no cure, no pay. Salvers who fail receive absolutely nothing, but those who succeed can be awarded tens of millions of dollars. Despite competing interests, every initial decision pivots on one judgment: can this ship safely reach a repair port, or is she already a total loss? To buy the ship time, the class surveyor may approve a temporary repair. Emergency righting squads of certified welders embark within 48 hours, while commercial dive teams install cofferdams, watertight steel enclosures clamped over the external hull to allow internal cutting and re-welding. Internally, the damage zone receives a reinforcing system of hydraulic shores and steel bracing. This temporary stiffening allows the hull to resist the dynamic hydrodynamic pressures of the upcoming voyage, including the violent slamming of head seas. Regulatory standards are strict. Doubler plates are explicitly prohibited as permanent fixes for external shell plating. These patches are accepted only as emergency measures, and they carry a formal regulatory expiry date from the moment they are welded in place. If the ship cannot move under her own power, she proceeds under tow. Rigged with towing bridles and flanked by salvage tugs, she waits for specific weather windows to begin the slow journey to the nearest capable drydock. These emergency interventions are strictly provisional. Engineers are manufacturing just enough structural survival capacity to withstand a final voyage to the repair yard.
Once dry docked, surveyors can trace the path of the kinetic energy that caused this impact. A collision load propagates. Internal frames and longitudinal stringers are often found deformed 20 meters behind the visible rupture in the shell plating. Grounding damage delivers a different pathology. The hull's momentum is absorbed by a small contact area on the seafloor, pushing the steel irreversibly past its elastic yield point. This permanent set crushes the duct keel and compromises the ship's longitudinal rigidity. Thermal damage is more insidious. Intense fire can leave structural steel looking geometrically intact while silently destroying its internal metallurgical properties. An experienced surveyor reads the temper blue discoloration of the steel to map the maximum temperatures the structure endured. Firefighting creates a counterintuitive danger. When white-hot steel is hit by a sudden quench of seawater or CO2, the rapid thermal gradient triggers martensitic transformation. The steel's crystalline structure transforms from soft and ductile into a state that behaves like brittle glass under impact. Because of these invisible changes, identifying the true extent of the damage requires scientific hardness testing. The decision to crop and renew steel depends on the metallurgical data, not just the visible tears. The permanent repair process involves cropping the damage back to sound parent metal. New inserts, fabricated to original design grades like EH36, are fitted to the opening and welded by qualified specialists, with every seam verified by radiography or ultrasonic testing. But while the physical work proceeds, a second calculation is playing out in the insurer's office, the constructive total loss evaluation. This chart shows the threshold where salvage and repair costs exceed approximately 75% of the vessel's insured value. When the costs cross this line, underwriters can declare a CTL, paying out the policy limit and taking ownership of the wreck. The physical reality of those numbers is visible here. In 2011, the MV Rena was declared a constructive total loss after grounding off New Zealand. Because the projected costs exceeded her value, she was abandoned to underwriters and broken up in situ. Cold insurance mathematics dictate a vessel's ultimate resurrection. Even if a repair is technically possible, the work only proceeds if the financial calculus remains below those critical contractual thresholds. When the math and the engineering align, the class surveyor signs the repair records, lifting all conditions of class. Statutory certificates are reinstated, and the vessel that arrived in tow sails back out under her own power, fully restored to global trade. We have followed the mechanics of this industry from the first distress call to the final weld, but the global network of yards and surveyors that maintains these ships is ultimately powered by people. In the maritime hub of Surabaya, Indonesia, local shipyards face a striking structural paradox. They command a massive industrial labor force and a clear cost advantage, yet they are restricted by a severe shortage of internationally certified welders and inspectors. While ships are made of steel and governed by global regulation, the survival of the global fleet depends entirely on localized human capital. Join us for our season finale as we leave the